Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain Damage. This movie tells the story of an ex-con who battles it out in the cage to pay for the operation that would save the daughter of his victim. Along the way, he finds fatherly love and kindness in the most unlikely of places. What kind of battle will be fought? Can he repent by saving the daughter of his victim? Let's find out in Damage. Damage begins with the story of John Brickner, who just got out of prison. He served only 4 years instead of 7 years for the murder charges he had committed in the past. Once free, he intends to repent and start a new life. For that, he moved to Seattle and got a job as a construction worker. One night, while John was visiting a bar, he saw a waiter named Frankie being harassed by 3 people. John felt called to teach the 3 people a lesson. He walked over to them, twisted his neck, and held the face of the intruder to apologize to Frankie. The 3 finally left the bar. Seeing the incident, the bar owner offers John to work at his bar as a security guard. John accepted the offer and started doing 2 jobs at once. In the morning, he becomes a construction worker, while at night, he works at the bar as a security guard. The next day, John began to carry out his duties as a security guard. He tried to reconcile 2 drunk customers who were involved in a fight. Before long, the 2 of them made a fuss again. Reluctantly, John had to hit the 2 men, so they left the bar. The incident was witnessed by Frankie's boyfriend, Reno Paulsaint. Then, Reno offers John a job. He also gave his business card for John to contact him if John was interested. But, politely, John turned it down because he already had 2 jobs. One day, after working as a construction worker, John was approached by a woman named Veronica. It turns out that Veronica is the wife of the person John had killed. She was also the one who had sent a petition for John to be released from prison, so that John only served half his sentence. However, Veronica's efforts to get John out were not for free. She asked John to provide $250,000 to help pay for her daughter's heart transplant surgery. To make amends, John tries to help Veronica find money for her daughter's surgery. When he came home, he counted all the money he had, but of course the amount was far from the total cost Veronica asked for. Feeling pressed, John met with Frankie to ask for Reno's address. Later, Frankie takes John to meet Reno somewhere. When he met Reno, John was taken to a very crowded building. John asked the job that Reno offered. Reno then invited John to follow him into the building. It turned out that inside, he saw a free battle arena. All around him, the audience cheered for the fighter. Reno said that John would be able to fight the fighting fighter and win the match. If he wins, then John will receive a very high fee. Knowing that the job offered by Reno is underground fighting, John refuses. John remained firm in his stance even though Reno forced him. The next day, John came to Veronica's house. There, he apologizes for not being able to give the money Veronica needs. Hearing this, Veronica brings up and collects John's promise while in prison. At that time, John promised he would do anything to atone for his mistakes. Veronica's commotion and screams were heard by her daughter, Sarah, who then came out of her room to check what was going on. When he saw Sarah, who was sick and weak, John felt sorry for her. Finally, John promised to try to find Sarah's medical expenses. The next morning, while John was working on construction, his boss suddenly fired him because he had made a small mistake. However, not long after, his boss had a heart attack and passed out in front of John. Luckily, the life of the boss can be saved, thanks to the breathing assistance provided by John. That night, John watched a free fight. There he also saw Reno and Frankie watching the game in progress. Unfortunately, Reno's fighter suffered a severe injury and was immediately taken to a room. Upon inspection, the fighter will not be able to complete the second round, which is about to begin. John then offered to Reno to replace the position of the fighter. However, John's fight, which had not even started yet, was interrupted by the appearance of Mr. Wolf, who wanted to collect a debt from Reno. Reno promised to pay off his debt after the game was over. Not long after, the match started. Punches and kicks were launched by both fighters. The audience cheered until the round was over. In the next round, fighters are allowed to use weapons. John's opponent uses an iron club to attack John. John was hit by his opponent's blow, but he was still able to fight back. Finally, with bare hands, John can beat his opponent and win the match. While in the locker room, John was given the money he won by Reno. However, John gave some of the money to the first fighter he replaced. A few days later, Reno and Frankie came to John, who had just finished his morning run. Reno offers John to fight in the next fight. Considering he still needed a lot of money, John agreed. Reno also invites John to live with him. For the next fight, Reno and John meet Deacon, the judge who presided over the match, at a restaurant. They discuss the requirements for the next fight. Reno, who went bankrupt, was certainly difficult to qualify for a bet that turned out to require a lot of money. Another problem is, John's status is still parole. But at the end of the conversation, John was able to convince Deacon to let John fight. Then, Reno is seen pawning the ring left by his father, who is a former legendary fighter, for the purposes of the next match. Later, Reno brought John to meet someone named Nestor. But when they arrived, Nestor ordered his men to kill Reno because Reno was unable to pay his debts on time. Seeing this, John immediately intervened Nestor's men who were ready to take Reno. John said he was ready to fight on conditions. If he wins, Nestor must free Reno. However, if he lost, he would pay all of Reno's debts. Finally, the 10-minute battle with a stake of $10,000 began. John fought Nestor's fighter fairly easily. Punches and kicks launched by John can hit his opponent until his opponent fell motionless. Finally, John won the fight. John and Reno immediately left the place. On the way home, John gets a call from Veronica, who informs her that her daughter has been rushed to the hospital because she is unconscious. There, he felt concerned when he saw Veronica's daughter lying weakly on the bed. He was even more determined to try his best to help Sarah so that she could be operated on as soon as possible. After returning from the hospital, he overheard the conversation between Reno and Frankie in the living room. Frankie feels that Reno is using John to pay off his debts. Reno did not accept Frankie's accusation. According to Reno, John, who is an ex-convict, is not as good as Frankie thought. Reno even accuses Frankie of having a crush on John. John immediately appeared after eavesdropping on their conversation and went straight to the room. At night, John was getting ready to fight. Reno then apologized for his words. Day after day, John won the wild battle, even though the money he earned was still not enough to qualify for a fight against the reigning champion Sharp. John's name is getting more and more soaring made the guts of the other fighters shrink. Even some of the scheduled fights ended up being cancelled because the opponent was afraid of losing against John. However, Reno said that it was a natural thing. He promised to find another fighter to fight John. When John went out for a drink at a bar, he saw two people watching him from the car. It turned out that the two people were subordinates of Veltz, a tycoon who gave money to Reno. Meanwhile, Reno, who was gambling elsewhere, was visited by Veltz's men. Reno then begged and asked for time so he could pay off his debts. Veltz's men gave Reno 1 week. However, if Reno fails, Veltz's men will injure Frankie. One night, John fought back with a fighter from Mexico. In a fairly fierce battle, John was able to defeat his opponent and win the match. After that, John celebrates his victory with Reno and Frankie at a bar. There, John asks Reno why he hasn't arranged his fight with Sharp. Reno argued that after John's name became famous, they increased the amount of the bet, so they still had to raise money to cover the cost of the bet. Not long after, John got a call from Veronica. He and Frankie immediately went to Veronica's house. When he got there, he saw Veronica, who was already unconscious. John also finds a letter containing the cancellation of a heart donor for Sarah. It turns out that this frustrated Veronica to the point of committing suicide. Wasting no time, John took Veronica to the hospital. While waiting for Veronica at the hospital, John told Frankie the reason why he wanted to fight all this time was just to save the life of a child whose father he accidentally killed. Not long after, John got word that Veronica had come to her senses. John also asked Veronica to be patient because he was trying to raise money to help his daughter's surgery. Meanwhile, Reno goes to the pawn shop to redeem his father's ring that has been pawned. However, due to Reno's late redemption, his father's ring has been sold to someone else at a much higher price. Reno felt annoyed but couldn't do anything. One night, John again fights with Nestor's fighter. As it turned out, Reno and Nestor arranged a match with a prize money of $150,000. Nestor's fighter, who looks like he's about to lose, asks Nestor to give up. However, Nestor refused to budge. He asked for the fight to continue. Because John was afraid to kill his opponent, he decided to end the fight. As a result, Nestor won the match. At the same time, Veltz's man came to Reno and beat him hard for being late in paying his debt. The next day, John was followed by Veltz's men again. They asked John to come with them. It turned out that John was taken to a very luxurious house. There, he met Veltz, who turned out to be the son-in-law of John's boss at construction work. In return for having John saved his father from having a heart attack, Veltz will do whatever John asks of him. John made 2 requests. First, the money as much as $150,000, which will be used for Sarah's heart surgery. Second, he asked that all of Reno's debts be paid off. However, Veltz was only willing to write off all of Reno's debts. As for Sarah's heart surgery costs, Veltz will give it if John is willing to fight for him. Reluctantly, John agreed. After meeting Veltz, John said goodbye to Reno and Frankie because he wanted to move out of Reno's house. Reno thanked John for helping him from the bonds of debt that wrapped around him. Not long after, Reno got a call telling him that someone had paid a bet so that John could fight against the defending champion, Sharp. John also realized that it must be Veltz who paid the bet. The next night, John was ready in an arena to fight Sharp. Sharp is a formidable opponent and is quite difficult to beat. Their fight does not only involve bare hands. They can use chains or clubs in the arena. John was thrown and looked unconscious. Seeing this, Sharp celebrated the victory. However, who would have thought John was able to get up and fight again? His punches and kicks got harder and harder until Sharp finally decided to give up. John finally won the match. At the end of the film, Veronica is seen running down the hospital hallway. It turned out that day, Sarah's operation had been carried out. John also visited the hospital to provide support. Veronica is very grateful for John's help. After that, came Reno and Frankie. There, John returns the ring left by Reno's father that he bought from a pawn shop. The film ends. The lesson that can be drawn from this film is that we must believe that there is a way for every difficulty we face. Keep believing in yourself and follow the fate that happens, because maybe it will lead you to a better way out. From John's character, we can see that he doesn't waste the second chance he is given to improve himself. His penance from the past had finally worked its way out.